Dad, come to Sophie's pinning ceremony if you want, but don't stay for dinner. Lauren's parents are hosting, and they want it to be immediate family. I read my son's text twice while standing at my kitchen counter with a mug of coffee cooling beside my hand. The first time, I thought I had misunderstood him. The second time, I understood perfectly. I was welcome to watch my granddaughter cross a stage in her white nursing uniform. I was welcome to clap when her name was called. But afterward, when everyone drove to the restaurant for photographs, speeches, and dinner, I was supposed to disappear because my daughter-in-law's parents had decided I did not qualify as immediate family. 10 days earlier, I had paid the final $6,240 on Sophie's nursing school account. Over 4 years, I had sent the college $58,400 so my granddaughter could graduate without carrying a mountain of debt. And the restaurant where they planned to celebrate belonged to my son only in the way a rented apartment belongs to the person sleeping there. I owned the brick building. My son, Ryan, leased it from me for less than half what similar commercial space cost in that part of Toledo. He had been paying $950 a month for 5 years. The place could have rented for at least $2,700. I covered the roof replacement after a storm. I replaced the furnace when it failed. When Ryan wanted a second walk-in cooler and told me the restaurant couldn't afford it, I paid for that too. Still, according to his message, Lauren's parents were hosting, and I was the extra person who might make things uncomfortable. I was 67 years old, a retired union electrician, and I had spent most of my adult life fixing problems before the people I loved had to feel them. My wife, Ellen, used to warn me about that. She died 7 years earlier, and sometimes I still heard her voice when I did something she would have recognized as one of my bad habits. Frank, helping someone over the bridge is one thing. Carrying them after they reach the other side is something else. I had laughed the first time she said it. That Thursday afternoon, I finally heard what she meant. My phone buzzed again. Ryan had sent another message. Please don't say anything to Sophie. She's stressed enough already, and we don't need drama on her weekend. That sentence bothered me more than the first. If Sophie knew and wanted a small dinner without me, I could accept that. She was 22. It was her graduation. But Ryan was telling me not to mention it to her, which meant there was at least a chance she had no idea. I sat down and looked around the kitchen. Ellen and I had remodeled ourselves after the kids left home. On the refrigerator was a photograph of Sophie at 13, holding a fish she had caught off my brother's dock. Another showed her at 17 wearing the tool belt I had given her after she insisted on helping me replace outlets in her bedroom. I had never needed her to owe me anything. I had paid her tuition because Ellen and I had promised each other that if we could help our grandchildren start adulthood without crushing debt, we would. The mistake was everything I had attached to that promise afterward. When Ryan lost his sales job 6 years earlier, I gave him money to cover bills for 4 months. When he decided to open Mercer's Table, I helped him find the old restaurant building on Monroe Street. I bought the property through Mercer Street Properties, the small LLC Ellen and I had created for retirement investments, and my attorney insisted Ryan sign a real commercial lease. I had protested at the time. He's my son, Nancy. My attorney, Nancy Alvarez, had stared over her glasses and said, "Exactly. That's why the paper needs to be clearer, not looser." The 5-year lease stated the rent, the renewal date, repair responsibilities, improvements, and one sentence I remembered, because Nancy had made Ryan initial beside it. Tenancy created no ownership interest and no promise of future transfer. I had thought the language sounded cold. Now I was grateful for it. The lease was due to expire in 73 days. Ryan had been asking me for months when we were going to sign another 5-year renewal. I always answered, "We'll get to it." Suddenly, I knew I had an answer. I did not call Ryan. I did not send a paragraph about respect. I did not threaten him with the building. I called Nancy. She answered on the 4th ring and said, "Frank Mercer, you only call me before dinner when somebody has either died or signed something stupid." I said, "Nobody died, and I don't want to renew Ryan's restaurant lease." She went quiet. "That's a significant decision. What changed?" I looked at my son's message again. Nothing changed today. I think I finally noticed what's been changing for years. Nancy asked me to come to her office the next morning before I did anything else. Then she added, "And Frank, until we review the lease, don't tell Ryan what you're thinking." I told her I wouldn't. When we hung up, I placed my phone face down and finished my cold coffee. For once, I did not feel powerful because I had found a way to hurt my son. I felt ashamed that one rude text had forced me to calculate how much of his adult life I had quietly been carrying. The next morning, Nancy spread the lease across a conference table while I sat opposite her with the graduation message printed from my phone. Her office smelled like copier paper and the peppermint tea she drank year-round. She read Ryan's text, set it aside, and asked me the question I had been asking myself all night. If he apologized in the next 10 minutes, would you still want the lease to end? I thought about it carefully. Yes. She nodded. Then we can talk about business instead of anger. That was one of the reasons I trusted her. Nancy walked me through the agreement. Ryan's lease ended July 31st. The contract allowed either side to decline renewal as long as written notice was delivered within the required window. He was current on his rent. He had no purchase option. He had no ownership stake. He had made improvements to the dining room and bar, but those had been approved under the lease and gave him no equity in the building. Nancy looked up. You understand that choosing not to renew may force him to relocate his restaurant. I do. Relocating could cost him customers. I understand. And if this is really about him excluding you from dinner, you may regret using a commercial lease to settle a family insult. I slid the text toward her. The dinner is not why I'm doing it. The dinner is why I finally looked at the arrangement honestly. Then I explained what I had never added up before. 5 years of below-market rent meant I had given Ryan roughly $100,000 in rent savings alone. Add the cooler, the roof work I covered beyond my landlord obligations, a $14,000 loan he had never finished repaying, and the smaller checks I wrote whenever the restaurant had a temporary cash flow problem. I had helped because Ryan was my son, and because Ellen had adored the idea of him building something of his own. But somewhere along the way, my support stopped feeling like support to him. It had become a feature of his business model. Nancy asked, "What do you want after July? Market rent from a new tenant, or I sell the building?" I haven't decided. And Ryan? Ryan finds a restaurant he can afford. She studied me for a moment and said, "That sounds painful. It doesn't sound irrational." She prepared a notice of non-renewal, but did not send it yet. I asked her to wait until Monday. Sophie's ceremony was Saturday, and no matter how angry I was with Ryan, I refused to turn my granddaughter's graduation into a legal delivery date. When I left Nancy's office, I had one more decision to make. I drove to a park near the Maumee River, sat in my truck, and called Sophie. She answered brightly. "Grandpa, please tell me you're wearing the blue tie tomorrow. I haven't decided which tie yet." "Blue. Grandma bought you that one. That means blue." I smiled despite myself. Then I asked, "Sophie, do you know what the plan is after your ceremony?" "Dinner at the restaurant. Mom says Grandma and Grandpa Bennett are doing something big." She called Lauren's parents Grandma and Grandpa Bennett. "Who's going?" I asked. "Everybody, I think. Aunt Carla, Uncle Pete, Mom's sister, some cousins." Why? The answer hit harder than I expected. Ryan had called it intimate. He had called it immediate family. Sophie was describing at least 15 people. I said, "Your dad asked me to head home after the ceremony." There was a long silence. Then she said, "What?" I repeated it. Sophie's voice changed. "Grandpa, I told Mom last week I wanted you sitting next to me at dinner." I closed my eyes. "Don't fight with them today. Why would Dad tell you not to come? That's something he needs to explain." Sophie breathed sharply. "Is this because of the Bennetts?" "I don't know." She was quiet again, then said, "They think Mom and Dad paid for school." That sentence made me sit up straight. "What do you mean?" Sophie spoke more slowly now. "At Christmas, Grandpa Bennett made a toast about how proud he was that Mom and Dad had sacrificed so much to put me through nursing school. Dad thanked him. I thought, maybe he just didn't want to make things weird. "Did Ryan ever tell you what I paid? I know you helped." "Sophie, I paid most of what wasn't covered by your scholarships. She didn't answer for several seconds. Most? $58,400 over 4 years. I heard her inhale. Grandpa, Dad told me you put in maybe 10 grand. Something inside me settled into place. The dinner was no longer about one family deciding I wasn't polished enough for them. Ryan and Lauren had built a story in which they were self-made restaurant owners who had sacrificed for their daughter, and I had quietly become inconvenient evidence against that story. Sophie sounded close to tears. I told her, "Your graduation is not going to become a courtroom for your parents' choices. You worked for that degree. Tomorrow belongs to you." She asked whether I was still coming. I told her I would be in the auditorium. And dinner? I looked through the windshield at people walking along the river. I'm not going somewhere I've been told I'm not family. Sophie said, "Then I'm not going either." I answered immediately, "No. Don't make your graduation about defending me. I'm not defending you. I'm deciding where I want to eat." She had Ellen's stubbornness. I could hear it in every word. I made her promise not to announce anything until after the ceremony. The next afternoon, I wore the blue tie. I watched Sophie receive her nursing pin, then cross the stage with tears in her eyes. When she spotted me, she smiled so wide I felt my chest tighten. Ryan saw me too. He gave me a small nod from 3 rows away, the kind strangers give each other in elevators. Afterward, families crowded the lobby for photographs. Sophie came straight to me, wrapped both arms around my neck, and said loudly enough for the people around us to hear, "Thank you for getting me here, Grandpa." Ryan's face changed. Lauren looked toward her parents. I did not say a word about money. I kissed Sophie's forehead, told her I was proud, and handed her the card I had brought. Ryan approached me after she moved away. "Dad, don't do this here. I'm taking pictures with my granddaughter. She knows about dinner now." She called me her grandfather. I decided not to lie when she asked why I wasn't staying. His jaw tightened. "You could have waited one day. You could have invited your father." I left before we started repeating ourselves. Sophie skipped the restaurant dinner anyway. She met me at a little Polish place Ellen had loved on the east side, still wearing her graduation dress under her coat. We ate pierogi and chocolate cake while her phone buzzed on the table. I never asked her to show me the messages. That night she hugged me in the parking lot and said, "Dad told everyone you were tired." I laughed once. Apparently the truth would have ruined dessert. At 9:12 Monday morning, a courier walked into Mercer's table with a sealed envelope addressed to Ryan Mercer. I was not there. Nancy called after confirmation and told me the notice had been delivered exactly as the lease required. The restaurant could operate through July 31st. Ryan had 71 days to relocate, negotiate a market rate arrangement if I chose to offer one, or close. He called me before Nancy finished explaining the delivery. I saw his name on my screen and answered. "Morning, Ryan." "What did you do?" There was kitchen noise behind him and something metal clattering onto a counter. "Nancy sent you a letter." "Don't talk to me like I'm stupid. You're throwing me out of my restaurant because I didn't invite you to dinner." "No, I'm choosing not to renew a lease that was always temporary." "Temporary? It's been 5 years. That's why leases have end dates. You told me this place was for me. I bought a building and rented it to you cheaply so you could get started." Ryan raised his voice. "I built that restaurant. Then your restaurant should be able to pay for the building it occupies." He went quiet for half a beat, then said, "What are you talking about?" "The market rent on Monroe Street is around $2,700. You pay $950. Because you're my father." There it was. Not because business was slow. Not because we had agreed to a permanent subsidy. Because I was his father. I said, "Being your father made me willing to help you start. It did not make me responsible for keeping your overhead artificially low forever." Ryan accused me of humiliating him in front of Sophie, of trying to impress people with money, of punishing Lauren's parents because they had wanted one private dinner. I let him finish. Then I asked, "Why did you tell the Bennetts you paid for Sophie's schooling?" Silence. "Who told you that?" "Sophie knows what I paid now. You had no right to discuss our finances with her. They were her tuition bills." His voice sharpened. This is exactly why we didn't want you at dinner. You make everything about what you've done for people. That one hurt, because there was a piece of truth buried inside it. I had been overly generous for so long that money had become part of nearly every important family event. I took a breath. Then you should be relieved. Beginning July 31st, money won't be part of our relationship unless you decide to make it part of the conversation. Ryan said something under his breath and hung up. Lauren called 20 minutes later. She tried a softer approach. Frank, I know feelings got hurt, but the restaurant supports your son. Then your son will find another location. Do you understand what moving a restaurant costs? Yes. That's why Nancy gave him the notice required by the lease instead of changing locks or playing games. My parents think you're doing this because you're jealous of them. I almost laughed. Lauren, your parents can think whatever makes dinner easier to digest. Her tone hardened. Ryan put years into improving that building. You can't just benefit from his work and throw him away. That comment interested me because Nancy had predicted it. I asked Lauren to have any legal concerns sent to Nancy and ended the call. By Wednesday, a lawyer named Philip Crane had done exactly that. His letter argued that Ryan had invested labor and money in the property while relying on repeated family assurances that he would eventually receive the building. Nancy called me into her office. This is not a strong ownership claim based on what I've seen, but we're going to answer it carefully. She asked for every email, text, receipt, lease renewal, and bank record connected to the property. We spent 2 afternoons building a file. The result surprised even me. Of the major capital work performed during Ryan's tenancy, I had paid for almost all of it. The new roof had been an owner expense. I paid half the HVAC replacement, even though the lease split the cost differently. I paid for the walk-in cooler. Ryan had paid for paint, furniture, signage, and a patio he wanted for summer customers. Those were business expenses, not purchases of real estate. Then Nancy found the document I had almost forgotten. 3 years earlier, Ryan had asked me whether I might someday sell him the building. Nancy had drafted a 1-page acknowledgement before approving a patio modification because she did not want construction money, later confused with equity. Ryan had signed it. The language was plain enough that I remembered teasing her about how repetitive it seemed. Ryan Mercer acknowledged that all improvements were being made as tenant, that such work did not create an ownership interest, and that no future transfer had been promised. His initials sat beside the paragraph. Nancy leaned back and said, "If his lawyer hasn't seen this, his lawyer is about to have a much worse Wednesday." She sent the response that afternoon. The next morning, Philip Crane called her instead of sending another demand. Ryan's claim did not disappear, but the tone changed from, "Your client cannot do this," to, "Would your client consider negotiating a purchase?" That was a legitimate question, so I considered it. Nancy arranged a meeting for Friday afternoon with Ryan, Philip, and me. Lauren did not attend. Ryan sat across the table looking exhausted. For the first 10 minutes, lawyers talked numbers. The building had recently appraised at $486,000. Ryan wanted to buy it for $250,000, arguing that years of rent and improvements should count toward the price. I said no. He offered $300,000. I said no again. Finally, he looked at me and said, "You don't even need the money." I felt more disappointment than anger. "That sentence is the problem, Ryan." He frowned. "What problem? You've been deciding for years what I need. You decided I didn't need the rent. You decided I didn't need credit for Sophie's tuition. You decided I didn't need a seat at dinner. Now, you're deciding I don't need the value of a building I paid for." He rubbed both hands over his face. "So you want market price from your own son? I want you to stop treating the words, 'my father,' like a coupon code." Philip looked down at his notes. Nancy said nothing. Ryan stared at me. I continued, "If you can qualify for financing and make a fair offer, I'll consider it like any owner would. If you can't, you have until the lease ends to move your business. What I will not do is give you another $100,000 or $200,000 because saying no feels uncomfortable." Ryan's eyes filled with anger. Mom would never have done this. I had known that sentence was coming from the moment the courier delivered the envelope. It still cut me. "Your mother wanted you to succeed." Exactly. She also wanted you to know when success was yours. He looked away. I took the old acknowledgement from Nancy's file and slid it across the table. You signed this 3 years ago. You knew you were a tenant. Somewhere along the way, you started telling yourself a different story, because the different story was easier. He stared at his initials. The room went quiet. Then he pushed the paper back and asked, "What happens if I can't find a new place?" I answered, "You solve the problem." He laughed without humor. "That's it? That's what you've been asking me to prevent for 6 years." The next 7 weeks were the quietest and hardest stretch of our relationship. Ryan stopped calling me. Lauren removed me from a family group chat I had barely used anyway. Sophie, to her credit, refused to become a messenger. She started her first nursing job at ProMedica and visited me every Sunday she wasn't working. I gave her a folder containing the statements from the education account Ellen and I had created years earlier. There was still money left for certification courses or graduate school. Sophie looked at me nervously and asked, "Are you sure you still want me to have this after everything?" I told her, "Your father's behavior does not get transferred to you like a utility bill." She laughed, then cried, and I pretended not to notice until she was ready to talk. Ryan eventually found a smaller restaurant space 9 miles away in a neighborhood with less traffic and cheaper rent. I heard about it from Sophie, not from him. At first that bothered me. Then I realized it was exactly what I had said I wanted. He had a problem, and he was solving it without asking me to absorb the cost. The new landlord required a deposit, personal guarantee, and market rent. Ryan sold a boat he had bought 2 summers earlier. He canceled a golf club membership. Lauren picked up additional bookkeeping clients. None of those things ruined their lives. They were simply decisions adults make when their expenses are larger than their income. Mercer's Table closed on Monroe Street at the end of July and reopened in its new location 3 weeks later. I did not go to the opening, not because I wanted to punish Ryan, but because he did not invite me. For the first time, I let the relationship be exactly what he chose, instead of financing a version I wished existed. Meanwhile, Nancy listed my building. A local couple who owned 2 bakeries offered $472,000. I accepted. After closing costs and taxes, I moved part of the proceeds into conservative investments and used a small portion for something Ellen and I had talked about for years, but never done. I bought a used 22-foot travel trailer. My brother Carl laughed when I told him and said, "You're 67. You hate camping." I said, "I hate sleeping on the ground. That thing has a mattress and air conditioning." In September, I drove it through Michigan's Upper Peninsula for 10 days. I fished in the mornings, cooked steaks badly at night, and discovered that there were entire stretches of my life I had postponed because I was always waiting for one of my children to need something. I returned to Toledo with a sunburned nose and 300 photographs nobody had requested. Sophie came over to see them anyway. Ryan still had not called. I asked her once whether he was doing all right. She said, "He's tired. The new place is smaller, but they're making it work." I nodded and changed the subject. By November, I had accepted the possibility that my son and I might never return to what we had been. The strange thing was that I no longer wanted what we had been. I missed him. I did not miss being responsible for him. Those were different kinds of grief, and it took me months to learn the difference. The Sunday before Thanksgiving, my phone rang while I was replacing a light fixture in the hallway. Ryan's name appeared on the screen. For a moment, I simply watched it. Then I answered. "Hello?" he said. "Dad, I'm not calling because I need money." I put the screwdriver down. "All right." There was a pause. I figured I should start with that. I almost smiled. Probably wise. He asked if he could come over. An hour later, his truck pulled into my driveway. He looked older than he had at Sophie's graduation, not in a dramatic way, just tired around the eyes. He carried a paper bag from the bakery that had bought my old building. "Thought you might find this funny," he said. Inside were cinnamon rolls. We sat at my kitchen table. Ryan did not mention the building at first. He asked about my trip. He asked whether the trailer leaked. He asked whether Sophie liked her job. Then finally he said, The new restaurant almost failed the first month. I waited. Rent is $2,100. Insurance went up. The hood system needed repairs. I kept looking at the numbers, thinking the landlord was ripping me off. He gave a short laugh. Then I called 3 other places and realized he wasn't. Market education can be expensive. Yeah. He rubbed his thumb along a scratch in the table Ellen had made years earlier. I spent 5 years thinking I was a better businessman than I was. The restaurant was working, but part of why it worked was because you were carrying expenses I didn't even count anymore. I said nothing. He continued. When you ended the lease, I told everybody you were trying to destroy me. I believed it too. Then I had to apply for the new place, show real financial statements, put up a deposit, cut things we couldn't afford. I hated you for making me do it. I know. I don't now. He looked at me. I'm still angry about how it happened. So am I. That seemed to surprise him. You are? I wish I had changed the arrangement before I got angry enough to change it all at once. I helped create the problem, Ryan. Every time something got difficult, I made it easier. You learned to expect that because I taught you to expect it. He stared down at the table. That doesn't excuse what I did at graduation. No. He nodded. Lauren's parents thought I owned the building. I had suspected that. And they thought we paid for Sophie's school. I know. Ryan looked embarrassed. It started small. Her dad asked how tuition was going, and I said we were handling it. Then that became us paying for it. Then I didn't correct him because I liked how it sounded. He swallowed. The dinner was supposed to be this big celebration of what Lauren and I had done for Sophie. If you were there, somebody might ask questions. I told myself you would understand. Then when you didn't, I decided you were being difficult. I felt the old anger move through me, but it no longer controlled the room. You asked me to disappear so your lie would be easier to maintain. Yes. He did not defend it. That mattered more than I expected. I'm sorry, Dad. I looked toward Ellen's photograph on the shelf. For months I had imagined what I would say if Ryan ever apologized. I had rehearsed speeches about gratitude, respect, adulthood, and the difference between family and finance. None of them felt useful now. I said, "You hurt me." Ryan's eyes reddened. I know. Not because I needed public credit for the money. I didn't. You could have told every person in Toledo you paid Sophie's tuition, and I probably would have let it go. What hurt was learning that preserving the story mattered more to you than having your father at the table. He nodded slowly. I know. We sat there for a while. Then he said, I don't expect everything to be normal. Good, because I don't want normal back. He looked confused. What do you want? Something better than what we had. I told him I wanted a relationship where he could call without preparing a request, where I could say no without becoming the enemy, where dinner invitations were invitations instead of payments due. I wanted him to know that my money would someday go where I chose, and that inheritance was not a salary he had already earned. Most of all, I wanted him to understand that I could love him without rescuing him. Ryan listened. Then he smiled faintly and said, That sounds expensive. I laughed for the first time with my son in months. For you, maybe. Before he left, he asked if I had Thanksgiving plans. Sophie was working until 3. Carl was going to his wife's family. I told him I had planned to cook a small turkey and watch football. Ryan said, Come to our place. I looked at him. Who's going to be there? Lauren? Sophie, after work? Me? And the Bennetts? He paused. And before you ask, they know the truth now. All of it? Enough to make her dad stop giving speeches about sacrifice. I smiled. I'll think about it. Ryan stood, picked up the empty bakery bag, then noticed the hallway fixture still sitting on the floor. You? Changing that yourself? I was an electrician for 41 years. You're also 67 and standing on a chair by yourself. Before I could answer, he took off his jacket, dragged the ladder from the closet, and said, Hold this. 20 minutes later, my son was wiring the fixture while I stood below, handing him screws. When we finished, he did not ask me for anything. He did not mention the restaurant. He did not ask about the money from the building sale. He just looked up at the light, flipped the switch, and said, There. One problem you didn't have to solve for me. On Thanksgiving, I went to his house. Lauren apologized before dinner without blaming her parents, stress, or misunderstanding. The Bennetts were polite and slightly uncomfortable, which was fine with me. Sophie arrived from the hospital wearing scrubs under her coat and hugged me before she greeted anyone else. When we sat down, there was a place card beside Ryan with my name on it. No speech was made about who paid for what. Nobody discussed the old restaurant building. We ate turkey, argued about the lions, and laughed when Lauren burned the first tray of rolls. It was not a perfect reunion. Perfect reunions belong in movies. Real families recover in smaller ways. One honest conversation, one unpaid bill, one invitation that does not come with conditions. I had spent years believing my job as a father was to keep the people I loved from feeling hardship. At 67, I learned something I should have understood much earlier. Sometimes hardship is the room where adulthood finally begins. Ryan did not need my building to remain my son. Sophie did not need to inherit her father's mistakes to remain my granddaughter. And I did not need to keep writing checks to prove I belonged at the table. For the first time in years, my family knew exactly what I was willing to give them. My time, my love, my advice when they asked for it, a hand when life knocked them flat. What they no longer had was automatic access to everything I had earned simply because we shared a last name. Strangely enough, once the money stopped doing the work, we finally had to become a family again.